I never thought I'd win. The Spellbinding Arts Gala was the pinnacle of achievement in our niche world of illusion and performance magic. Yet there I was, clutching the shimmering crystalline trophy with trembling hands. The applause thundered around me, but it felt distant, almost like I was hearing it underwater. My name echoed over the sound system, announced with reverence, but the weight of the trophy in my hands was the only thing grounding me. The trophy was exquisite, an obsidian base with an intricate, glass-like orb perched atop it. Within the orb, tiny flecks of gold seemed to shimmer and swirl, catching the light in a mesmerizing dance. It felt oddly warm, as if it pulsed faintly against my palms. The inscription etched into its base read simply, "To the Master of the Arcane Arts." As I stepped off the stage, I felt an unease creeping over me. Maybe it was exhaustion after months of preparation, or the overwhelming realization that I'd won against magicians I'd idolized for years. But even then, I sensed it was more than that. Something was wrong. The gala ended with a blur of handshakes, champagne toasts, and hollow congratulations from people who hadn't believed I'd make it this far. I barely noticed as I made my way home, the trophy wrapped in my jacket and tucked carefully into my bag. That night, as I sat in my apartment, the trophy took on an almost hypnotic presence. I'd placed it on the coffee table, but no matter where I moved, my eyes kept drifting back to it. The golden flecks within the orb seemed to shift in ways that defied explanation. When I leaned closer, I could have sworn I saw faint shapes, symbols perhaps, forming and dissolving within its depths. The air in the room grew heavy, pressing against my chest with an inexplicable weight. A shiver coursed through me, though the room wasn't cold. I turned away, determined to shake off the unease, and told myself it was nothing more than my overactive imagination. But as I lay in bed later that night, I couldn't sleep. Faint noises drifted through the apartment, the groan of the floorboards, the distant hum of traffic outside. Yet there was something else, something almost imperceptible. A whisper. I shot up in bed, straining my ears, but the apartment was silent. My heart pounded as I crept to the living room. The trophy sat where I'd left it, its golden flecks spinning faster now, like they were caught in a whirlpool. The orb glimmered faintly in the darkness, casting distorted reflections onto the walls. I turned away, but the whispers began again, just under the threshold of hearing. They didn't form words, just an insistent murmur that prickled against my skin like static electricity. I retreated to my bedroom, closed the door, and buried myself under the covers. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of golden lights and swirling voids. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, and the oppressive feeling from the night before seemed to evaporate. For a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a bad dream. But when I returned to the living room, the trophy greeted me with an eerie, unchanging stillness. The golden flecks within it glinted in the sunlight, but now they felt less like an embellishment and more like something alive, watching me. I tried to distract myself with work, diving into emails and planning my next performance. But the unease was persistent. Every so often, I'd hear a faint rustling sound, like fabric brushing against the floor. Each time I turned, I found nothing. By evening, the tension was unbearable. I decided to investigate the trophy more closely. Pulling out my magnifying glass, a tool I used for crafting intricate stage props, I examined the orb, its swirls of gold spinning lazily. That's when I noticed the inscription again. It wasn't the same. My heart stuttered. The words, "To the Master of the Arcane Arts," now had faint, jagged markings curling beneath them, symbols I didn't recognize. They looked like runes, etched so delicately that they seemed to shimmer only under direct light. A wave of nausea rolled through me. Was I losing my mind? Had those marks always been there? I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture, determined to analyze it more closely. But when I checked the screen, the runes were gone. It was just the original inscription, plain and unadorned. The whispers returned that night, louder now. This time they carried a rhythm, like the rise and fall of a chant. The golden flecks inside the trophy orb spun so fast they blurred together, forming the illusion of a pulsing golden eye. I backed away, my throat tight with fear. Something was inside the orb, something ancient, something waiting. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, but deep down, I knew better. The whispers followed me into the next day, faint and elusive, like a half-remembered melody. No matter how hard I tried to ignore them, they lingered just beneath the edge of hearing. It was as if the air itself carried their soft, insistent murmur. I couldn't bear to stay in my apartment any longer. Grabbing the trophy and tucking it into a padded box, I left in search of answers. The name of an eccentric scholar, Dr. Alara Moorcroft, came to mind, a former professor of folklore who had an infamous reputation for indulging in the supernatural. I'd heard her name whispered among stage magicians, often as a punchline, but desperation overrode skepticism. I found her address online and set off, clutching the box like a lifeline. Dr. Moorcroft's home was exactly as I'd imagined, a cluttered townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, its windows curtained with layers of thick, patterned fabric. She greeted me at the door, a petite woman with graying hair tied back in a loose braid. Her eyes were sharp, assessing me with the precision of a predator sizing up prey. "You're the illusionist," she said, without waiting for me to introduce myself. Her gaze flicked to the box in my hands. "You've brought something. Show me." Inside, the air smelled of old paper and dried herbs. Bookshelves lined every wall, groaning under the weight of ancient tomes and brittle manuscripts. A small table in the center of the room held an assortment of candles, crystals, and brass instruments whose purpose I couldn't guess. I placed the trophy on the table, hesitating as I opened the box. Dr. Moorcroft leaned forward, her expression unreadable as she examined the artifact. "Fascinating," she murmured, running her fingers lightly over the orb's surface. "This is no ordinary object." "Tell me what's happening," I said, my voice tight. "I can't sleep. I hear whispers. The trophy, it changes." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Objects like this are rare," she said, her voice low. "They're called vessels. They hold energy, sometimes memories, sometimes fragments of the entities that created them. And this one..." She trailed off, her eyes narrowing. "This one is powerful, dangerous." A chill crept down my spine. "Dangerous how?" Dr. Moorcroft rose, crossing the room to a bookshelf. She returned with a faded leather-bound book, flipping through its brittle pages until she stopped on an illustration that made my breath catch. It was a sketch of an orb, strikingly similar to the trophy. Around it, a series of runes spiraled outward like the ones I'd seen on the inscription. "This symbol," she said, tapping the page, "is a binding sigil. It's meant to contain something." Her expression darkened. But containment is never perfect. I swallowed hard, staring at the sketch. "What's inside it?" "An echo of a ritual," she said. "Or perhaps the remnants of a being tied to that ritual. Either way, it's not benign. The whispers you hear, they're not a warning. They're a call." "A call to what?" "To complete what was left unfinished." Her words hung heavy in the air. I felt like the room had grown colder, the shadows deepening with each passing second. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice shaking. Dr. Moorcroft hesitated. "You need to sever the connection. The trophy is drawing energy from you, feeding on your presence. If left unchecked..." She didn't finish the sentence, but her expression said enough. She handed me a scrap of paper with a series of instructions. follow these steps to neutralize its influence. It may not destroy the vessel, but it should stop the effects. I thanked her, though gratitude felt hollow against the rising tide of dread. As I left her house, the whispers seemed louder than ever, curling around my thoughts like smoke. I followed Dr. Moorcroft's instructions to the letter, preparing my apartment for the ritual with trembling hands. The room was dimly lit by a ring of candles, their flickering light casting jagged shadows on the walls. A bowl of salt sat in the center of the coffee table, surrounded by a circle of chalk that enclosed the trophy. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me with each passing second. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with a relentless, rhythmic cadence. I steeled myself, reciting the words, "Doctor." Moorcroft had written, each syllable clumsy and foreign on my tongue. At first, nothing happened, but then the orb began to glow faintly, its golden flecks swirling faster than ever. The whispers rose to a crescendo, a cacophony of overlapping voices that made my head throb. The room seemed to darken, the candlelight dimming as the shadows on the walls stretched and twisted. "Stay calm," I muttered, more to myself than anything else. I poured the salt around the circle, my hands shaking as I completed the perimeter. The glow of the orb intensified, casting golden light that seemed to pulse in time with the whispers. Suddenly, the air grew icy. My breath misted in front of me, and the faint outline of shapes began to emerge within the orb. They were amorphous at first, but as I stared, they coalesced into something almost human. Figures with elongated limbs and featureless faces. They moved. The shapes inside the orb began to press against its surface, as though trying to escape. My heart raced as I stumbled back, clutching the paper with the final incantation. "Begone," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Return to where you came from." The orb flared with a blinding light, and the figures inside seemed to recoil. The whispers became a roar, filling the room with an unbearable intensity. I shouted the final words, my voice breaking under the strain. And then, silence. The orb dimmed, its golden light fading to nothing. The whispers were gone, leaving behind a hollow, ringing silence. I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling. But as I looked at the trophy, now inert and lifeless, a deep unease settled over me. The room was quiet, yes, but it wasn't empty. Something was still watching. I wanted to believe it was over. The trophy sat on the table, cold and dull, its golden flecks inert. The whispers had stopped, and the oppressive weight that had filled my apartment seemed to lift. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was the kind of stillness that comes after a storm, heavy with the expectation of more to come. I sat on the floor, staring at the trophy, every muscle in my body taut with unease. The ritual had worked, or so I thought. But there was something about the silence that felt deliberate, as if it wasn't an absence of sound, but a presence waiting to reveal itself. The room felt wrong, its dimensions subtly off, like the walls had shifted imperceptibly closer. The flickering candlelight cast long, warped shadows that stretched across the ceiling, forming shapes I didn't dare to name. I glanced at the clock. Midnight. The stillness pressed against my eardrums, a quiet so intense it was deafening. Then, just as my heartbeat began to slow, I heard it. A single whisper. It wasn't coming from the trophy this time. It was behind me. The air turned icy, the temperature plummeting in an instant. My breath clouded in the dim light as I turned slowly, dread pooling in the pit of my stomach. The shadows on the wall twisted and writhed, separating from their sources and pooling together in a single, undulating mass. At first, it was just darkness, a void where the light of the candles couldn't reach. But as I watched, it began to take shape. A vague outline emerged, tall and impossibly thin, its movements unnaturally fluid. It stood still for a moment, and then it turned its head, or what should have been its head, toward me. The whisper came again, low and drawn out, resonating from all directions at once. It wasn't a word exactly, but it carried meaning, a sound that brushed against my mind like the edge of a blade. "You remain." I stumbled back, my legs weak, bumping against the coffee table. The trophy wobbled precariously, its orb catching the faint light of the candles. For the briefest moment, the golden flecks inside it shimmered faintly, as though responding to the entity. The shape seemed to notice, its head tilting in a sharp, unnatural motion. The whisper came again, louder this time, incomplete. The words clawed at my thoughts, not spoken, but imprinted directly into my mind. My breathing quickened as I clutched the paper from Dr. Moorcroft's ritual. The instructions were complete. I had done everything as she had written. So why was this happening? The entity moved closer, its elongated limbs stretching and bending at impossible angles. It didn't walk. It glided, the space around it bending as if reality itself recoiled from its presence. The air grew heavier with each passing second, and I realized that the candles were flickering, their flames shrinking, their light dimming. "No," I whispered, clutching the trophy with trembling hands. "It's done. I sent you back." The entity paused, its form flickering like a glitch in an old film reel. For a moment, I thought it would fade, but then it surged forward, its presence filling the room with an unbearable cold. I stumbled backward, the trophy slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The orb rolled free, spinning slowly on its axis before coming to a stop. The golden flecks inside it erupted into motion, swirling violently as the shadows converged around it. The runes on the base glowed faintly, their jagged lines pulsing in time with the light inside the orb. The whisper became a low hum, rising in pitch until it was nearly a scream. "You called, you bound, you remain." Desperation overtook my fear. I grabbed the orb, its surface warm and alive against my skin, and held it up to the entity. "Take it," I shouted, my voice shaking. "Take what you want and leave." The entity recoiled, its form flickering erratically. The golden light of the orb flared brighter, illuminating the room in a sudden burst. The shadows retreated, shrinking back into the corners as the entity dissolved into wisps of smoke, pulled into the orb like water swirling down a drain. And then it was gone. The orb in my hands dimmed, its light fading until it was once again a simple, inert object. The air cleared, the oppressive weight lifting as the room returned to stillness. The trophy lay at my feet, cracked and lifeless. But as I stood there, trembling and alone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly won. The entity was gone, but its words echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of what I had set in motion. "You remain." Weeks later, I packed the trophy away in a wooden crate, sealing it with layers of tape. I told myself I would never look at it again, never let it see the light of day. But even now, in the quiet of my apartment, I can still hear faint whispers in the silence. And sometimes, when the light hits the crate just right, I swear I see a faint golden shimmer beneath the wood.